Welcome to program, Luck University's global program. I am Associate Professor Dr. Surin Maisikrot, Vice President for Global Engagement. With us today are two very distinguished scholars, one from Sweden and the other one is from the US. We are very fortunate indeed to have the two scholars and inventors to be with us today talking about various issues regarding scientific discovery, agricultural sustainability, and all of that. So we have with today Professor Roland von Bossenmer. He's from Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences and the Nordic Genetic Resources Center in Sweden. And then our second guest today is Professor John Warner. He's from the Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry, very interesting green chemistry. So first of all, I would like to ask you, each of you, to describe your major work, and then from there we will be talking about other issues. But because both of you have been in your area for a very long time, and you have done a lot of contributions. Prof. Warner, is the owner of more than 300 patents, for example, and Professor von Bossenmer, he's also been writing, contributing, giving speeches. It's a lot of work that has been done. So can you start with you, Professor?
Okay. Yes, I have a pretty long career working with biodiversity and genetic resources. Actually, I started working with the wild flora once upon a time, almost 60 years ago, and I was fascinated by the diversity you see. And over the years, I got more and more into domestication process, the scientific background, how a wild plant become a cultivated plant, and the richness you find among the domesticated crops and also their wild relatives. And that's where I also got into genetics and plant breeding, and have worked since more than 40 years together with plant breeding companies, with state breeding, and also getting the interest of preservation and utilization of genetic resources. We are losing a lot of genetic resources by ignorance and bad knowledge and also catastrophes. So it's very important that we first of all collect what we have and then preserve it in the best way, and then we utilize it. And for the future, what you can see coming with an increasing population of the world, there's a need that we have a high production still. We need actually to increase the production. We need to produce healthy food, and we need to produce agriculture and horticultural crops in a sustainable way, with the thinking of a changing climate and increasing environmental problems in the world. That's why I've been devoted to, first of all, the whole area about preservation of genetic resources. I work together with the Thai gene banks, and I have also visited the Thai biobank system, which is very, very impressive. But also that we can use the best technology for the future to receiving these goals, and also to block the hindrances that we can utilize it in a proper way, with all the proper respect, to, of course, to legislation and other things. I think it's important, but I will stress that science is the background for the future.
John.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Yeah, the way I describe what I'm doing is, if today in our society, if you open up the newspaper, look on the internet, you hear about all this bad things about all the products that we use, global climate change, water pollution, carcinogens, and things that are hurting humans and are hurting the environment. And say, okay, why would a scientist invent a technology that was harmful? Why would someone make a lipstick that causes cancer? Why would someone make a plastic that causes birth defects? Of course, nobody wants to do that. It's always an accident. There is no law in science that says the color red must cause cancer. There is no law in science that says something that makes a plastic flexible causes birth defects. These are all accidents when we invent the product. So you say, well, why? Why would this happen? And if you look at the field of chemistry and material science, you find that people who get degrees in chemistry and material science never learn what is the mechanism of harmfulness. So, what makes a molecule a carcinogen? What makes a molecule contribute to global climate change? What makes a molecule have impact on species biodiversity? And if that's not part of what it means to be a chemist, how can we ask them to then go and invent things that don't cause these harms? So about 25 years ago, me and my colleague from the United States EPA, Paul Anastas, created this field called green chemistry. And we wrote this book called Green Chemistry, Theory and Practice, and defined the 12 principles of green chemistry. And what this is a science to insert within the field of chemistry so that when we invent in the future new products, we'll always make mistakes. That's part of being human. But maybe reduce the likelihood of that mistakes if the scientists have some training in this. And so this is an intersection between academia and industry so that people in academia can learn the next generation of products. So someday in the future, we have a whole set of products that don't hurt humans and don't hurt the environment. And that's called green chemistry.
And Professor Warner, you have invented, you are a great inventor. You have over 300 patents under your name. And all of that is under the green chemistry, would you say?
Yes. So the most important thing about green chemistry is we need to realize that government regulations to force people to use a technology because it's sustainable can only work for a short period of time because elections happen, new governments get elected that change those policies. So the only true sustainability is if we have products that people want to buy, not are forced to buy because of governments, but want to buy. So if we can make technologies that work better and are inexpensive and affordable, then people will want that and they will say, and oh, by the way, it's also safe and non-toxic. And so the whole concept of green chemistry is the burden is on science to invent the technologies that are independent of regulations and things like that. Today, we can't do that, not because we don't want to, but because we still haven't invented the technologies. So we need the next generation of scientists to come into the university and invent those new products that are going to keep people safe and protect the environment. It's not going to happen unless people invent these things.
It is very interesting, Professor Warner, because now everybody embraces green.
Yeah.
Whatever green chemistry, green this and agriculture, everything, the environment is a buzzword, for virtually everybody. And this is, you pioneer green chemistry, and that years ago.
Yes.
What prompted you to invent this thing, the field, which has now been embraced around the world?
I'm going to share with you a very personal story, okay? And I don't do this very often, so it's a very personal story. So when I was 27 years old, I was very successful as a young scientist. I was on the cover of a magazine called Celebrity Magazine. I already had 50 patents. I had all these products, every award in Washington, D.C., got all these awards. And so my head is this big. I am the greatest scientist who ever lived. Very proud of myself. And disaster happened. I lost a 2-year-old son. My son, John, died of a birth defect. And lying in bed the evening of his funeral, I asked myself, what if something I touched in the lab caused my son's birth defect? What if something I got an award for caused his disease and ultimate death? I didn't feel like I was some great, wonderful scientist. I felt something was missing. And I realized that never in my education did I have anything to answer the question. So the answer to the question didn't bother me. What bothered me was the fact that I couldn't answer the question. And so this has been a passion of mine since the early 1990s to change the field of chemistry, to make this part of who we are in material science. Because if the only people who understand molecular structure, if the only people who can relate molecular structure to the behavior of a molecule are not interacting with toxicity and environmental impact, who's going to? And so this is an important unmet need and a great opportunity for universities to leapfrog into the forefront of science, to be pioneering this very important
Interesting,
science.
because often scientific discovery could be prompted by something very personal.
Yes.
Yeah, it is indeed. Now, I turn to Professor von Bosmer, who has very impressive academic career, and you're still working very hard, trying to discover new things and all of that. And you are into the plant breeding, and using technology. What is the state of that at the moment? Preserving genetics, looking more closely at genetic resources, that sort of thing.
That's a very broad field. That's on the one hand, that's the preserving of the original genetic resources for the world. But on the other hand, and that's what's so interesting with plant breeding, because I know few areas of science which are so, on the one hand, very historical, and on the same time so close to the borderline of science as plant breeding. We are using methods which are more than 100 years old still. But on the other hand, we are using modern gene technology, which is outdated if it's 1 year old. And that concerns me, because there we have had, as John is saying, also a communication problem. You have certainly all heard about genetically modified organisms, which has been in some part of the world, they have been accepted. In other parts of the world, they have not been accepted for legislation and for fears and for myths and for a lot of things. And there I think that we on the scientific side have been very bad to communicate about what is truth, what is not truth. I'm not saying we should let everything free, not at all. We should have legislation, we should have improvement of things and testing things carefully. But on the other hand, using modern technology will help the future if we can do it in a sustainable way. So the communication from the academic side is very important. I worked very closely with the breeding companies. Actually, we are situated as a university outside, as one department, very close to at that time, the Swedish and North European industry. So we learned by heart how the companies function. And we knew that the communication between us and the companies, and between us as scientists and the society, needs to be much, much better. And that we can answer questions in a proper way. Not try to debate, not try to promote things, but to explain things in a much more proper way than it's done today. And that's why I think the whole scientific community needs to be much, much better.
Are you now happy with the progress that, or you must have some kind of measurement that, okay, what you've done and the way the world is, dealing with this, or the level of understanding government policies and all that. Are we the world in general on the right track in terms of using a proper technology to preserve genetic resources?
To preserve, yes. I mean, that's the whole gene bank system. That's widely accepted. That's not controversial at all. And there are, I say again, that the Thai gene bank system is excellent. And also you have a new institute, actually in Bangkok, then with the National Thai Biobank, which is very excellent. So that, I wouldn't say that's a problem. That's an improvement. But that's on the other side, which is a problem, what has happened, and that's the world is very much divided. In some countries, the new technology is accepted, and GMO is a very old technology, it's 40 years old, and the new technology, which is called CRISPR-Cas, is used in medicine, but is very controversial still in plants. Why? Because we need to be better to communicate. We need to be better to tell both the governments and both the general public what it is about. And there I see the world is divided, and that there I'm not happy at all about the development. And if we can do something there, I would certainly do that. Together with Thai colleagues, we are preparing to describe that better in a book in Thai about what is going on in Thailand, actually, about plant breeding, preservation of genetic resources, development of sustainable agriculture, and using modern technology.
It's very interesting. You are two of the top scientists in the world, and John Warner in particular. You've been one of the most recognized inventors. But when we are talking about science, we are talking about the role of university, we are talking about industry, we are talking about government regulations, and we are talking about the new generation, all of this. I mean, how do you see in a broader scheme of things, we are worried that there are not many people, because you are using science to help society, to help people, to better lives, people's lives. But we hear, for example, young people now are less interested in doing science. We hear about the lack of university industry collaborations to produce better things for people, for humanity. We hear about, governments are very short-sighted. They tend to not to pay more attention to long-term things. Would you share your insight? And particularly, Professor Warner, you've been to many countries. You're originally from US, and then you work in Australia, and then you work in Germany. In other words, you've been to 3 continents. And Professor von Bothmer too. I mean, you've been to many countries, and you've been on speaking circuits all your life. So what would your assessment of that?
Well, from my perspective, I feel the crisis we're in today, both the sustainability needs and the misunderstandings of technologies, is perhaps because of our structure in education is very siloed. And that the people in science are here and the people who are in humanities are here, and we do not cross-communicate very well. And then when we graduate and leave the university, we have no skills to have those communications, and just propagates forever. And so the new opportunities for universities is to have more interactions, having the scientists have assignments with people from the humanities. We don't have to turn the scientists into writers. We don't have to turn writers into scientists. We don't have to turn business people into scientists. We need to teach them to communicate to one another and value each other and learn how to share things. And I would argue that that process not only helps with communication, but those individuals become better at what they do. If you have to think about how to communicate what you do to someone who is not skilled in your area, you must really understand it. It's very easy to talk to someone who knows all the acronyms and all the buzzwords, and you always wonder, do they really understand what they're talking about? So speaking to others is so important in the 21st century. This isn't an option, this is a requirement.
And
It was interesting because John and I had the possibility to talk about these things the other night. And we completely agree. We come from quite different areas and quite different disciplines. We have quite an experience from different fields. We completely agree on that. What you need for the future is better communication, better education for the students to understand other areas and to communicate what they are doing. Don't make them into writers or into journalists or something, but to communicate and tell the whole story
Yeah.
in a much better way.
And I like to, because we are on university campus, and I've been with university for a long time. I mean, as academic for many years. One of the things that I've been involved with is the curriculum planning, curriculum review. And interesting, Professor Warner, you cross over between private sector, being entrepreneurs, government, and academia. So you are very familiar with all of these key players. So what is your view on current curriculums? I mean, across universities around the world, in the West, in the East, or any countries that you are aware of?
Where I see the most exciting developments in curriculum, really somewhat simple, but there are universities now who are requiring their students to go out to the community and explain what they're doing, what their research is, what they're learning in their class, to people outside of the university, and they become ambassadors of higher education to the local community. So it's wonderful for the local community to learn and see these excited students that are doing things. But again, it becomes so powerful for those students to develop the skills to communicate to that community. And so now I find there are many universities that have, as part of the requirement, they must do some public service of communicating what they do to the local community, whether it's children in grade schools or community groups or things like that. I feel that that just is a lifelong training that can help them throughout their career.
Yeah, what I've seen in Thailand, we've seen the other places as well, but that is that you are now regionalizing the university system. And I think that's very, very good indeed, that you have, for example, the Wailai Luck University here, which are now working hard to develop in a very high international standard. And that is also in other areas in Thailand. I think that also to promote the education, to promote the regional societies around, not to have everything in one place in Bangkok. So that's a development which I really agree to. So that's interesting.
And digitalization has made it more possible for regional universities like us to work with many, to be able to work with international partners and all of that. So that is another aspect, Professor Warner, the digital world that we are into, and to the degree to which we incorporate can be sometimes quite problematic, incorporate into our practice.
Well, it's interesting. One of, to say anything was beneficial for COVID is crazy, but it did train people to be able to operate more remotely. I know before COVID, so many people said it is impossible to do this through Zoom. It is impossible to do this through these things. And people have found a way. Now, I still think human interaction is critical, so I wouldn't want to go 100% there, but I think we as a species have learned a little bit more about how to do remote interactions better, and it has globalized so that we can have a seminar. I can, from Boston at 2 a.m., have speak to a group of people in Thailand, and then at 4 a.m. be speaking to people in Australia, and then at 6 a.m. be speaking to people in London, and never leave my house, and so from a climate change, we're doing good and not having all those transportation impacts, but it's also an opportunity to engage with more people, and I think that's wonderful.
I was very impressive. I was very impressed by both of you was, making a point about communicating science to community. The people, because in the end they are stakeholders. And so that's a pretty. But what else should university do? You certainly you mentioned all of certain parts of it, but what else can university do to promote that? I'm talking about like promoting multidisciplinary studies, getting humanities students to work collaboratively with science students. Or what is your view of that?
Well, I quite agree with you that the world has been changed over the last couple of years with the communication. You can sit home and talk to everyone else.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it never replaces that you and I are
Yes,
sitting here and talking with you.
Exactly.
So don't forget that. Continue to invite people,
Yes.
continue to travel,
Yes.
continue to promote people, students to leave the country for a while, coming back.
Yes.
And then not ending up in just the ministry, but also in industry, in promoting science and in science itself. So it's very important that you have an exchange program and that you see each other eye by eye.
And that's the magic of people coming together physically. I think that human beings want to collaborate. Human beings want to interact. And so the more a university can have an instance where scientists and people in the humanities just happen to be in the same place, trust that they will find each other and they will do amazing things. So look at the infrastructure of the university and find out where have we artificially constructed roadblocks to prevent people from being human. And instead of engineering ways to push people together, figure out what are we doing to keep them separate and remove the artificial roadblocks that should never have been there in the first place.
It is inherited in us
Yes.
that we are like that as humans. We should collaborate.
But right, and so it's very
It's
artificial.
not only we want
Very
to,
artificial,
but it's
yeah.
really.
It's just like in the end we come back to basics, So back to basics.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we live in a world that has to be quantified, has to be evaluated, has to have metrics. And we need to realize every time we focus on some system of metrics, by definition, we're creating a silo. And so if we're very, very careful about thinking about that and the impact of that metrics, because we do need metrics, we need to evaluate success, but we need to give a little bit more thought to how are we inhibiting collaboration when we create that. Because if I say my goal is going to be how many molecules I make in the lab, well, collaborating with other people is not going to help me make molecules.
Or how many papers you produce.
Yeah, exactly, yes. And so it's important, but we need to find a new way to do that collaboratively.
Now, I come to the last point of our conversation today. I think among other things, we are struggling with promoting university-industry collaboration. It has been happening, but probably in a more piecemeal fashion. You both have experience, particularly Professor Warner. You have more experience in all of these areas, private sector, government, academia. What would you suggest we do to promote that?
Always be very careful because I always have an answer to a question. What I would do is I would set up a program that is an exchange between industry and academia take someone who's been working in industry for 5, 10, 15 years and give them an industrial sabbatical to come to the university. Take a person from the university and have them take that person's spot in the company, and for 6 months have them live in each other's lives. They meet all the people here, these people meet, and that's a lifelong interaction now that will only grow. But that first relationship won't happen without an active, so it could be a very formal program, it could be a named fellowship, maybe have some program where a university finds, you know, a bunch of different, they can be government agencies, they could be corporations, they could be other ways of forming these, that once people make the connection, trust that they will continue that connection. But the trick is to get that first connection going. So.
Professor Bosman?
Yeah, in a similar way, we are also collaborated in our way with industry. And we have tried to create a system with industrial PhD students, which has been very successful, that you, together with the industry, discuss a person coming from the academy is allowed, or actually from an industry by itself, is accepted, partly paid by the industry, but doing a regular PhD. In more or less in his job. And that is a system which has been very successful. I think you have that in the US as well. And that's a system which can be rather easily transferred also to many other countries. And I think you should also try to develop that further.
Yes, I agree. Well, that's what we have time for today. And it's been my great privilege to have this opportunity to sit here talking to two very distinguished professors, and I can't thank you enough for visiting our university to be part of the 48th International Congress on Science and Technology, and both of you have taken time off to share your views with us. By doing this program, of course, your views will be disseminated across campus and hopefully people beyond the campus as well. So it's been very grateful. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.